Have you ever been in a boat, in the storm, in the sea? I have, and I've been very seasick as well. And the storm only lasted for about one day. If you read at the end of the Acts of the Apostles, you read about an incredible storm and the boat in the storm and the boat shipwrecked in the storm. It's a very exciting story. The Apostle Paul was a prisoner and the soldiers were taking him to Rome. So they had to catch a boat that crossed the Mediterranean to go to Rome. So you had the prisoners with the soldiers and some paying guests and the sailors on this boat. 276 people bobbing up and down on the waves of the sea on their way to Rome, when the wind got stronger and the waves got rougher and the clouds got darker and the wind got stronger and the waves got rougher and a terrible storm was blowing and they all thought they were going to die. So you know what they did? They threw all their cargo overboard. Boxes, clothes, cases, extra food, everything they could possibly do to lighten the boat so that it wouldn't sink. And you know what happened? The winds blew and the waves rolled and the storm got stronger and stronger. So 2 days later, when they were convinced they were going to sink, they had no cargo to throw overboard, so they threw all their tackle overboard. All the ropes they weren't using, all the spare wood for masts, all the spare planks to make the holes closed in the boat, all the ropes, everything, they threw it all overboard. So there was hardly anything there except for people. And you know what happened? The storm kept going. For days and days, they hadn't seen the stars at night. They hadn't even seen the sun at day. They had no idea where they were, hardly knew what day it was, what time of day it was. And they despaired of surviving. When the Apostle Paul got up and he spoke to them, and he said in verse 22 of Acts 27, he says, "I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost." How many would be lost? Not one of you will be lost. So how many would be saved? A few of them? Lots of them? Most of them? All of them. How did the Apostle Paul know that all of them would be saved? Well, he tells us. He says, "Last night an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you.'" Did you hear that? God has graciously given you the lives of all who are going to sail with you. So why were they going to be saved? Because they were good? Because they were moral? Because they were being nice to the Apostle Paul? No, because of God's grace. God had graciously given them to Paul. So who was going to survive? All of them, right? Every single one of them. You got that, right? Every one of them's going to be saved. Who's going to be lost? None. Okay? So you expect they could say, well, that's fine, isn't it? Doesn't matter what we do. We're all going to be saved. So it's very surprising when 9 verses later, we come to the 14th day of the storm. For 2 weeks now, this boat has been almost sinking. The people must have been so seasick. I can't imagine what they would look like to look at them. And then the sailors were taking soundings. They were putting a rope down to see how many knots went down, to see how far it was to the ground. And they noticed that rapidly they were getting nearer and nearer and nearer to shallow ground. They didn't know where they were. They couldn't see it. But they realized that they were heading towards ground, rocks, something. And being sailors, they realized that this was dangerous. This was terribly dangerous. They needed to get off the boat as quick as they could. So they started to let down the lifeboat. But of course they couldn't take everybody in the lifeboat, so they had to tell the rest of the passengers that they weren't really going to escape in the lifeboat. All they were doing is they were using the lifeboat to go round to let some other anchors down, which wasn't true. And the Apostle Paul saw them And do you know what he said to the centurion? Listen. He said, then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, verse 31, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. Did you hear that? Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. But I thought that God had said they were all going to be saved. I thought the Apostle Paul had told them they were all going to be saved. And now they were told if they didn't stay with those people didn't stay with the ship, the people wouldn't be saved. It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? It sounds like at one point God is saying, oh, you're all going to be saved. And then he's saying, no, you're not going to be saved unless you do this. It looks like a contradiction. Actually, it is an illustration of the way of salvation. That God is sovereign and he preserves his people, but people are responsible and must persevere to the end. Now it looks to us as if it's a contradiction because we're looking at it from this level. But God, looking down from his perspective, sees there's no contradiction here at all. God is sovereign, we are responsible. And Jude here in his letter is hammering home human responsibility. Now there's no contradiction in the Bible between divine sovereignty and human responsibility. Now some people are fatalists. And they say, God is sovereign, que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. Well, that's it. You're saved. Doesn't matter if you stop believing. Doesn't matter if you live a bad life. Doesn't matter. You're saved. And they emphasize the sovereignty of God. Other people reject the sovereignty of God and they say, it all depends upon you. It all depends upon you. And you better be careful, because you don't want to lose it. You might fail at the end, you know. But actually those two, you can't have either of them. It's both divine sovereignty and human responsibility. It's very hard for me to explain this. It's very hard for you to understand it. But there it is. There it is, even in that illustration of the storm at sea. And it's here in the book of Jude. If you remember when we looked at verse 1 of Jude, we saw that the writer Jude, the half-brother of Jesus Christ, told us that we have been kept by God. And in verse 21, he says we have to keep ourselves in the love of God. Well, which is it? And the answer is it's both. And because it's both, it puts a tremendous responsibility upon us, which we can often forget. Because we believe in the sovereignty of God, we can forget our own responsibility. So here in this letter, Jude is hammering home our responsibility, which means that his letter is quite blunt and it's quite severe, really. And because it's short, the severity of it comes like wham, 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 wham. So I'm sorry if my preaching is a bit severe last week and this week. It's really encouraging next time, so don't stop coming. But the reason he's severe is because these things are so important, so very important. You must keep contending for the faith. And Jude gives us two warnings. The first one we looked at last week is verses 5 to 10. And the second one is tonight in verses 11 to 16. It's a second warning that he gives us. You know when you're driving your car and you're going along on the dual carriageway, and then you see signposts that tell you roundabout ahead. And the signpost will tell you, slow down, roundabout ahead, 30 miles an hour. And you're still going along at 70, you know, and you see the signpost. And then what happens? Suddenly, bump, 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 you know? You go over these white lines that are a bit bumpy, and that's a second warning. I must slow down, right? And that's what Jude gives us here. He gave us the warning that we heard last week, but just in case we didn't respond to it, he gives it to us again. You must slow down. This is serious. You cannot just run through life anyway. You can't do it. That's dangerous. And he repeats the warning. It's so similar to the passage we dealt with last week. Last week he started with 3 Old Testament illustrations. And this week he begins with 3 Old Testament illustrations. Then he applied them. Tonight he will apply them. Then he gives a quote from contemporary books. And tonight he gives a quote from contemporary books. And then he gives the application and conclusion at the end, as he'll do tonight. The structure is almost exactly the same as last week. So let's begin with looking first of all at the 3 Old Testament examples. That's verse 11. You see that here, verse 11. They have these are illustrations. These examples are all individuals. Last week they were 3 groups of people, and sometimes we are caused to follow the crowd. And that was the temptation last week. Tonight it's just one individual who can lead us astray. So let's look at these individuals. First of all, Cain. It says, woe to them, they have taken the way of Cain. You remember who Cain was? He was the first human born on earth, the eldest son of Adam and Eve. And he grew up working the ground, growing fruit and veg and those kind of things. His brother Abel looked after sheep and those kind of things. And when the time came for them to bring a sacrifice to God, it was just natural, wasn't it, that Cain should bring from his work some fruit and veg, and that Abel should bring from his work a lamb from the flock. That was just natural. The problem was, we're not to do what's natural. We're to do what God wants. And God had already shown Adam and Eve, since they sinned, there had to be a sacrifice for sin. And so Cain was expected to know that before he could approach God by just giving his possessions, he must approach God with a sacrifice for sin. A sin offering, a lamb that is slain. But for one reason or another, Cain couldn't be bothered or didn't think it was important to bring a sacrifice to God. He just wanted to bring some of his fruit and veg as an offering. And so he came not with faith, believing that God's will should be done, but he came just doing whatever he wanted to do. And there are so many people around in this world today who think that because God is infinitely merciful, he will accept whatever we give him. So let's just give him whatever we want. And they think that they can approach God anyway. And, you know, when they come and stand before God on the great day, they'll say, oh, well, look, if I was wrong, I'm sorry. And they forget that there's only one way to approach God. And that's with a sacrifice for sin. That's why Abel brought a lamb. That's why Jesus Christ died. Jesus Christ is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And there's no way that we can approach God and be safe unless there is the sacrifice for sin, unless we are trusting in Jesus Christ's death. But these people, they have taken the way of Cain. They think that they can just deal with God any way they like. And God will accept them. Of course he will. They think we don't need a sacrifice for sin. They don't think they need Jesus Christ's death in their place. They have worship without a sin offering. Then secondly, there's the people who have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. You remember the story of Balaam? King Balak wanted to curse the Israelites who were coming into his territory when they were leaving Egypt as slaves and they were going to the promised land. Balak wanted them cursed. So he hired Balaam, who was an occultist, a spiritualist, some kind of witch. And he paid Balaam a phenomenal amount of money to curse the Israelites. And Balaam would do anything for money. And the tragedy is that God stepped in to stop Balaam cursing the Israelites. God stepped in supernaturally, and Balaam had incredible dealings with Almighty God. But instead of repenting of his sin and finding forgiveness, Balaam was only concerned about getting money out of religion. And the end of the story is he led them to entice the Israelites to sin, and they did sin and grieved the Spirit of God. And Balaam was the kind of person who, religion isn't in order to get right with God, religion's in order to get on. Yeah, it's a way to get on in life. And we see this with politicians, don't we? How many politicians throughout the world like to be seen as, religious people? They think they might get votes. And businessmen, sometimes, they'll become religious. Well, every bit of help, if God's going to help me get rich, great. And it's good to be seen. You never know, I might get more custom from the church. And they just use God to benefit themselves. They're not concerned about getting right with God. They're concerned about getting rich. They're not concerned about getting pardoned. They're concerned about being popular. They just use religion. So as Cain rejected the sacrifice, so these people, all they're out is for themselves, out for me. Thought about myself, because I get paid to be religious, don't I? Yeah, I get paid to study the Bible and to pray and to preach sermons. And I just wonder how zealous I would be if you gave me the sack. Or you said, right, you can do the work, but we're not going to pay you. Maybe you should try it and find out. Maybe you shouldn't. But it's a great danger, isn't it? We can just be religious for our own benefit. We're not concerned about forgiveness and being right with God. We're just concerned about me. Look at me. So that was Balaam. And third example was a guy called Korah. Now, Korah is mentioned in Numbers chapter 16. And he was a relative of Moses and Aaron. And he didn't like the fact that Moses and Aaron had all the authority and he didn't have any. So he led a coup. He got 250 people to join him and to oppose Moses and Aaron. And why should we do what they say? Why should we submit to their authority? Why can't I have just as much authority for myself? I don't want to submit to their authority. I want to be in control. I want to hear my voice. I want to do things my way. I want it to be my way. And so God made an exhibition. Some kind of earthquake. The ground collapsed and they sunk into the sand and were buried alive. It was terrible. How many people today in our churches just want their thing done? They want it to please them. They want it to make them feel good. They're just out for themselves. They want to throw their weight around. They want to hear the sound of their own voice. They want everyone to listen to them. They've been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. Woe to them, it says. You know what woe means? It means alas and alack. This is dreadful. Disaster. Woe. Those are the examples. And then secondly, Jude illustrates what these people are like. In verses 12 and 13, he gives us 6 illustrations of these people. You say, okay, we look at those people and we see, yeah, they were pretty weak on the cross of Jesus Christ, and they were pretty much in it for their own benefit. And yeah, they did like to throw their weight around, but, we need people like that, really. We can't reject them. Okay, their theology might not be as sound as we like, but people like that get things done, don't they? Get things done, said Jude. You know what those people do? Look at them. First of all, these men are blemishes at your love feast, eating with you without the slightest qualm. What are love feasts? Well, in the early church, they would meet early in the morning before work, because Sundays was a working day, and they would meet for quite a short time in the morning before work, and they would commit themselves to be faithful to Jesus Christ. They would commit themselves to be faithful to the people of God. And they would commit themselves to be faithful in being good witnesses in the world. And they would commit themselves to follow the gospel. And then they would go off to work. And then in the evening, like us, they would meet together for a much longer period of time. And they would have a meal together. And during the meal, they would break bread and wine and have communion. And they would sing songs, and people would preach sermons, and they would encourage each other, and they would pray together. And it was called a love feast. And Jude says these people are blemishes at your love feast. And you know what that word blemishes means? It doesn't mean that their mascara's run. And it doesn't mean that they've got quite a lot of BO today. It's not what blemishes mean. The word blemish means rocks, hidden rocks under the ground, like a reef. So there you are. You're out sailing your boat. You're having a wonderful time. You're skimming across the water, and then suddenly you run across some rocks, which rips the bottom out of your boat, and within 2 minutes you've sunk. You didn't see them. They were hidden under the water. They were blemishes, and they've destroyed you. That's what these people are. They're blemishes at your love feast. You can't have fellowship with them. They will kill you. They will destroy you, says Jude. Have you seen this? You've seen a person, and he's left his wife and he's run off with someone else. And as a result of that, other people in the church say, well, if he did it, so can I. And it destroys them. It's terrible when this happens, when sin almost becomes infectious, contagious. And these men, they are blemishes at your love feast. Their lives are destroyed, but they destroy you as well. Don't think they're innocent. They are reefs under the water that will destroy you. Second illustration, they're shepherds who feed only themselves. Now, you know what it is when you take your kiddies to give bread to the ducks, don't you? And you see them, they feed just themselves, they don't feed the ducks. Well, it's a little bit like that. But just imagine that you're a shepherd and you've got 50 sheep. And Motsy's down here is a bit short on money. So you say to him, Motsy, I'll give you £200 to look after my sheep. Here's £200 to feed my sheep with. And so he says, fine. He takes the money. He says, oh, yeah, I'll feed the sheep. And then you go down to the seafront and you see Motsy's car parked outside the Royal Bath Hotel. And you see 50 sheep penned into the car park at the Royal Bath Hotel. You think, this is strange. I hope Motsy's all right. So you go in the Royal Bath Hotel, and there he is, enjoying a 15-course sumptuous banquet all on his own. And you say, how can you afford that, Motsy? And he looks at this £200 he's got in his hand, and he spent all the money that he should have been feeding the sheep with in feeding himself. And that's what these people do. They're in our church meetings, but they don't help you. They don't encourage you. They're just out for themselves. And they will use you, and they will use you, and they will use you, and they will drain you, and they will destroy you. Because instead of being shepherds who feed the sheep, they just feed themselves. Instead of feeding the sheep, they fleece the sheep. They're not there to help. They'll destroy you. And then he gives a third illustration. He says they're like clouds without rain. Wouldn't we like some clouds without rain, eh? Wouldn't it be nice to have it here? Yeah, but not there. In a hot climate. I have lived in the Sahara Desert, and I have been 4 months and not seen a solitary cloud in the sky. And I've seen people fighting over the wells to get some water, because without the rain, they die. The rain doesn't simply water the crops. It gives them water to drink. And without the rain from the clouds, they die. They pray for rain. And if they're not Christians, they do rain dances of some kind. Or magic. They're desperate for rain, and they see a cloud. Wonderful. A cloud. And it comes, and it gives no rain. And it raised their hopes just to leave them to die. Just to kill them. That's what clouds without rains do. The fourth illustration is that they are like trees without fruit. Indeed, they are like dead fruit trees, doubly dead, because they've got no root and they've got no fruit. So it's not simply that they're having a bad year, but maybe next year they'll produce some fruit. No, they're never going to produce any fruit. You're just going to work for them, tend them, look after them, and they'll give you nothing, and you'll die of starvation. Trees without fruit. Fifth illustration, they are wild waves of the sea foaming up their shame. Well, if you like windsurfing, you like wild waves on the sea, and you like to get out there, and you like to surf on the waves. But if you're a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee or the Mediterranean, and you depend upon fish in order to live, and the sea is rough, well, you can't fish. And not only can you get no food and no finances, but you're in danger of sinking. You're in danger of drowning. This isn't fun, this is fatal. They're wild waves of the sea. And sixthly and finally, they're wandering stars for whom blackest darkness has been reserved. It's so exciting, isn't it? When you go out and you look at the dark, starry sky and you see a comet going across. Or you see shooting stars. Oh, we love it. But if you're a sailor out on the seas and you try to navigate by a comet, when you start hitting the rocks and sinking, you curse yourself for being so stupid and following wandering stars. And these people are wandering stars. They will lead you astray. They will lead you to the rocks. They will lead you to make shipwreck of your faith. And for them, blackest darkness has been reserved forever. Woe to them, says Jude. Don't follow them at all, and don't let them be Sunday school teachers or youth workers or home group leaders. These people, they're not just people who are a little bit off. These people are dangerous. And so thirdly, in verses 14 and 15, Jude tells us that their judgment is well known. And here he quotes from a contemporary book. Do you remember last week he quoted from a book called The Ascension of Moses? Well, this week he quotes from another book. It's not in the Old Testament. It's not in the Apocrypha. It was around 100 BC, around that time. It was quite a popular book. Indeed, it was a very popular book. And it's the book of Enoch. And in this book you have Enoch, who's called the seventh from Adam because, well, we would say he was the 8th generation from Adam, but we would say he was the 6th generation from Adam, but they count Adam as 1 and then Seth as 2 and down to Enoch. And it says that in the book of Enoch we have this, that Enoch prophesied about these men. See, the Lord is coming with thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict. Who? All the ungodly. And look how many times ungodly is mentioned. 4 times. To convict all the ungodly of all the ungodly acts they have done in the ungodly way, and of all the harsh words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So these people are going to be all right, aren't they? No, it's obvious. Even their own books say that these people are going to be judged by God on the day of judgment. They need forgiveness. Don't follow them. Be warned. And so in verse 16, Jude gives us the conclusion of this section. And he says, these men are grumblers. All they can do is grumble and complain. Nothing's right. And they are fault finders. You talk to them about anyone, and you know what they'll tell you what's wrong with that person. So all they can do is that they're grumblers and fault finders. They follow their own evil desires. They're just out for themselves. They boast about themselves. They think they're wonderful. They think they're the kingpin. They think they're great. They think everyone should look up to them. Everyone should listen to them. Everyone should follow them. And if they flatter you, it's not because they think you're nice. It's not because they think you're good. It's they flatter others for their own advantage. They just want to increase their support group. Don't follow them, because they're ungodly people, like wandering stars, hurtling towards blackest darkness and judgment. Don't go with them. Fight for the faith. Contend for the faith. Guard yourself. Keep close to Jesus Christ. Keep close to the cross of Jesus Christ, and keep an eye on others. Protect them. Help them, because there are winds that will blow people onto the rocks, and when they hit the rocks they sink. And we have to persevere to the end, because it's those who persevere to the end who will be saved. So that's the warning. How do we persevere to the end? That's what we see next week. But let's make sure that we are going to follow Jesus Christ and nobody else at all. Let's sing this hymn as we close. It says, "O Jesus, I have promised to serve thee to the end. Be